Hey everybody, welcome back to Coach Hall Writes. In today's video, we're going to be talking about common mistakes that students make on their AP Lang rhetorical analysis essays. Before we get started, let's be sure to stay in touch. If you haven't already, go ahead and click that subscribe button and click the bell to turn your notifications on. That way you don't miss any upcoming AP Lang videos. Also, be sure to check out the description box below for links to some other helpful videos. Mistake number one for AP Lang rhetorical analysis essays is analyzing devices instead of choices. Now, let me be clear, you can write about devices, which are nouns. You can also write about appeals. However, if you write about choices, which are verbs, that leads to a more active or rhetorically accurate analysis. So it's not that you can't write about devices or appeals, it's just that writing about choices tends to lead to stronger writing. If you're unsure about the difference between devices and choices, I'll link some helpful videos in the description. In most cases, you can turn a device into a choice. So for example, repetition can become repeats. You just go from a noun to a verb. The same thing happens with juxtaposition. It becomes juxtaposes or contrasts. And then as I talk about in those videos that I'll link in the description box below, there are some choices that don't easily turn into a verb, but you can use a different expression. So for instance, the noun would be anecdote. That's the device. But if you're trying to phrase it in rhetorically accurate language, instead of saying uses an anecdote, you could say something like recalls a time when, reminisces on, tells a story about. So if you're the type of student who is currently saying uses repetition or uses a metaphor in your rhetorical analysis essays, I want you to try to focus on using rhetorically accurate verbs. The next mistake I see students making that tends to lead to a lower scoring essay is summarizing the passage. You're going to need to explain what the speaker says, so a tiny bit of summary is necessary in some cases. But it's important to remember that it's a rhetorical analysis essay. You're supposed to be analyzing, not summarizing. To fix this, you want to explain what the speaker is doing. So what choices is he or she making and why? So less emphasis on what they say and more emphasis on what they do. This is why those choice verbs that we talked about previously are helpful. This could be verbs like compares, describes, repeats, etc. It also helps if you include commentary phrases. This could be like the word because or phrases like in order to. There are even some verbs that tend to suggest commentary, like illustrates, highlights, suggests, emphasizes. By using those verbs, you're more likely to be offering analysis as opposed to summary. So here's an example of summary and how to fix it. This is about the Florence Kelly passage, and it says Kelly talks about child labor and says that children should not work at night, which is true. That is her argument in a nutshell. However, notice that that's very simplistic. So in the stronger example, notice that the quote is embedded into the sentence, which means that it has words on either side of the quote. And then instead of saying talks about child labor, we're focusing on the choice that she's making. Well, what is she doing? She presents an alarming statistic. Notice the added word there, alarming. Instead of just saying she presents a statistic, by adding in that descriptor of alarming statistic, it makes it more precise. So that's a little bit of a bonus tip for you. Adding in adjectives and adverbs can make your writing more precise, more rhetorically accurate. And then notice at the end of the sentence, we have emphasizing. So you can add a comma and an ing verb. So here it says emphasizing the scope of the issue and urging legislative action. That right there is telling us why she's doing it. And that's the real difference between summary and analysis. Summary tells us what they say, but analysis tells us why they're doing it. Another common mistake that I see students making is writing a device-driven analysis. A device-driven analysis is when an essay typically focuses on the devices or choices without considering the line of reasoning. To be clear, these essays can still score well. It's possible to still earn a 3 or a 4 in row B with a device-driven essay. That being said, I encourage students to do something called a chronological analysis because doing so acknowledges the speaker's line of reasoning. It's important to remember that a speaker makes the choices that they make in a particular order in order to have the speech or the letter, whatever it is, be the most effective. The choices in that particular order, that structure, if you will, creates a line of reasoning. And so if you follow the speaker's line of reasoning by analyzing chronologically, then your essay likely will have a line of reasoning as well. So you might be wondering, okay, what exactly does a device-driven essay look like? These essays are ones where a student might notice repetition at various points in the passage and then write a paragraph about repetition. And then let's say they notice another choice like detail, and they notice details throughout the passage. So they just pull different examples throughout the whole passage and put that in their second paragraph. Now, these paragraphs could be well written, but usually what happens is there's not really a connection or a link between the paragraphs. It tends to be something like one choice the writer makes is repetition, another choice the writer makes is detail. And sometimes the evidence selection feels a little bit like it's just a scavenger hunt, especially if the evidence is not presented in chronological order for that choice. So here's how you fix it. Here's how you go from device-driven to a chronological analysis. Your body paragraphs are still going to need a clear main idea, and that main idea will be a choice. However, instead of trying to find each instance of that choice throughout the entirety of the passage, you're going to divide the passage into sections. Usually, students can divide a rhetorical analysis passage into either 2 or 3 sections because the passages tend to be between 600 and 800 words. The sections do not need to be equal length, and you can have more than 3. When you're looking for shifts, look for a shift in either topic, choice, or tone. Once you have your sections, those can become your body paragraphs. As you're writing, though, don't refer to it as a section or a chunk. Like, don't say in the first chunk, the writer does this. Instead, though, you can use verbs like begins, continues, shifts from, or shifts to, depending on what you want to say, or concludes. These verbs help indicate the line of reasoning. This next mistake is, in my opinion, a crucial one because this is usually the difference between earning a 2 and a 3 in row B, evidence and commentary. A lot of times students are taught mnemonics like space cat or soapstone. Personally, I prefer space cat. If you've never heard of that, I will link a video in the description below that explains what that is. But basically, the rhetorical situation is the situation from which the text arises. Think of it like a puzzle. There are different components. There's the speaker, the purpose, the audience, context, exigence, and then also technically message or argument. Now, for some passages, you might know more about the speaker or the audience than other passages. But in general, those components are always present. And while I like the mnemonic and I do teach it to my students, I think there are times when students just kind of go through the motions of doing a space cat or a soapstone. They write the letters on their paper, they jot down a couple notes, and they think they're done. But in actuality, you want to use this knowledge in your analysis. So for example, ask yourself, what do I know about the speaker and his or her values? What do I know about the audience and their values? Another question that I like students to answer is, why does the speaker make this choice for this audience on this occasion? Because you need to remember that the speaker is tailoring their message or argument to that particular audience on that particular occasion. Not only are they making specific choices, but remember, they're making those choices in a particular order in order to be effective. So if you're going to go through the trouble of figuring out the space or the soap part, make sure that you actually incorporate that into your analysis. Now, as a way to help you with this, I do have some sentence frames that my students find useful. These sentence frames are a starting point, and then as you get comfortable with them, you can adapt them to fit your own writing style and whichever passage that you're working with. I'll include a link to that video in the description box below. But if you are a student who tends to get a 2 in evidence and commentary, definitely check out that video. It's going to be important that you connect the choice to the message, argument, or purpose. Remember that your prompt is going to ask about one of those 3 things. Starting in 2020, your prompt is going to say either convey a message, develop an argument, or achieve a purpose. Now, as far as which one, it kind of depends on the prompt. Sometimes they will leave it at that phrase, like they'll just say to achieve his purpose, but other times they will be more specific, like they might say to achieve his purpose of honoring so-and-so. If your prompt includes that extra information, definitely use that to your advantage, but also recognize that you are able to rephrase that and dig deeper. So if they give you a purpose, a message, or an argument, consider that sort of surface level and go beyond the provided information. Now, if they don't give you a specific message, argument, or purpose, as you're reading or after you're done reading, that's one of the first questions you need to ask yourself is what was the message, argument, or purpose, whichever one my prompt asked about. Now, here's my perspective on it. All passages are going to have a purpose. So even if you are not asked about purpose in your prompt, you can still connect to purpose. Typically, a passage is either going to have a message or an argument because the message is more like a lesson, whereas an argument is more persuasive. So if you're asked about message, you can still analyze purpose, but you want to make sure that you're actually answering the prompt too. So to make sure that you're answering the prompt, you should include the specific message, argument, or purpose in your thesis. And I would include it in multiple places in each of your body paragraphs. So here's an example of how to fix this issue. A lot of times students will mention choices, but they won't actually link it to the purpose. So what you need to do is you need to clearly state why the choice matters. A quick fix for this is to add a because clause or an ing commentary verb, like emphasizing or illustrating, something like that. So here's an example. Kelly repeatedly says we to include the audience. So the phrase there to include the audience is a hint at the purpose, but it's very vague phrasing. Similar phrasing might be to get her point across. While it is true and it is a hint at the purpose, it's not a very insightful purpose. So you can see in the bottom example that is stronger, it has more precise wording and a more specific purpose. So that one says, Kelly's repetition of we forges unity between her audience and the laborers they seek to protect, strengthening her call to action by framing it as a collective moral duty. Now, both of those sentences essentially convey the same idea, but notice that the bottom example is much more precise. So if you find that you're struggling to connect to purpose, ask yourself, why is the speaker making this choice? What is the desired effect on the audience? Just keep writing. And if you get really stuck, remember you could use the word because. Keep asking yourself why. Not fully connecting to purpose leads to another mistake that I see so often in student writing, especially in those essays that tend to score a 2 in evidence and commentary. And that mistake is limited commentary, which essentially means that the commentary is present, but it's superficial. Think of it like this. You're water skiing, but you want to be scuba diving. So sometimes students will say things like, this choice makes the speech more effective, or this speech helps the person achieve their purpose or get their point across. It's very vacuous language, meaning that it's very empty phrasing. You could take the phrase to get his point across, and you could use that phrase for multiple passages. So we want to make sure that we're being specific, really examining why the writer is making that choice for that audience on that occasion. We shouldn't be able to take your commentary about a particular passage and just change a couple words and stick it in an essay about another passage. With limited commentary, that's essentially what could happen because it's so surface level. So here's how you fix it. Let's take this weak example. Kelly uses statistics to make her speech more persuasive. Now, here's the thing. That is true. So we have the start of something. This sentence has potential. It's just that in that instance, they're not digging deep enough. So here's how you fix it. You can ask yourself why or how. So how does she make it more persuasive? Well, she paints a distressing picture that amplifies her ethical appeal, forcing the audience to confront the exploitation of children and feel a moral obligation to act. Notice we have that ing verb there again, adding that extra clause at the end of the sentence to make our writing more precise. So remember, commentary is your analysis. You're answering why, how, or so what. Admittedly, I don't see this next mistake too often, but I do think it's worth mentioning, and that is we don't want to insert personal reactions or opinions of the text. You want to focus on analysis. Your job is not to praise the writer or to offer any kind of critique. That's a totally separate type of essay that is not tested on the AP Lang exam. So keep the focus on how the rhetoric works. So here's an example that's too personal. It says, I think Albright is really inspiring because she talks about breaking barriers, and I agree with her. Now, that might be true. You might agree with her message, but take the first person opinion language out of it. So we want to get rid of the I think and the I agree with her. Because remember, our job is not to praise her writing or to criticize it. But let's take this idea and shift it into something that would be more appropriate for the task. So if we find her message inspiring, let's think about why the audience might find it inspiring. So you can see an improved version at the bottom of the slide. All right, there you have it. Those are the most common mistakes that I see students making on their AP Lang rhetorical analysis essays that tend to limit their score. If you found this video helpful, please do me a huge favor and hit that thumbs up. Also, don't forget to check out the description box below because I have several other rhetorical analysis videos on my channel that offer more detailed explanation about how to correct these mistakes to write a stronger essay. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, happy writing!